I have a short presentation, but I would like to first make a couple of comments to the proposals of Professor Luque. It is indeed the case that competitiveness in Greece has not been fully restored. In my presentation, I will show where Greece ranks in indices of global competitiveness. But the key point I'd like to make is that Greece's competitiveness will not be restored through a devaluation. There has been a very significant decline in real wages, as Professor Luque has just explained, more than 20% real decline in wages since the crisis started. So there has been an internal devaluation. The point of a country devaluing is to reduce its costs and prices relative to its competitors. This has happened in Greece, at least on the wage side, through internal devaluation. The real problem of competitiveness in Greece stems from regulatory barriers to competition, restrictive labor practices, red tape that increases the cost of doing business, a bloated public sector, and a very slow justice system. None of these will be addressed through a devaluation. No country has ever devalued its way to prosperity. Structural problems in the real economy cannot be addressed through monetary means. This is a point that President Draghi makes all the time. He says, there are limits to how much monetary policy can achieve. And beyond these limits, governments have to take over by implementing structural reforms. And with that, let me turn to my presentation. So the Greek crisis has been unprecedented for its depth and duration. We have been implementing 3 consecutive memoranda, as we call them, 3 consecutive bailout programs. There are those like Professor Stiglitz who say that austerity should now be relaxed and debt should be forgiven to make room for spending. External borrowing indeed has been reduced very significantly compared to where we started from. And remember that one of the reasons why the Greek crisis has been so protracted is the size of the initial disequilibria. We started with a fiscal deficit of 15% of GDP and an external deficit of about the same size. So these are huge imbalances, much bigger than those in the remaining southern European countries. But my point here is that austerity is not Greece's problem, and I will try to illustrate that in the next slide. Competitiveness is Greece's problem, it's not austerity. Greece never had the productive structure to have as high a per capita income as it did. According to a study by Ricardo Hausmann, very interesting study made at Harvard, it's called the Atlas of Economic Complexity. In 2008, the gap between Greece's income per capita and the knowledge content of its exports was the largest among 128 countries in the sample. And that is really, in one sentence, what the problem is. Greece lived way beyond its standard, its productive capacity. Greek exports consist mainly of fruits, olive oil, raw cotton, tobacco, and refined petroleum products. So these are all very low value-added products. The country does not produce machinery or other high-tech or chemicals. So the problem is that the production structure has not really adapted to become much more outward-oriented. On top of that, we had a self-inflicted wound with a catastrophic negotiation with creditors in 2015 that was a huge setback to the adjustment effort. According to the Bank of Greece, the cost of this catastrophic negotiation was 85 billion. According to the ESM, it's at least 100 billion. According to the former chairman of the Euro Working Group, it was perhaps as high as 200 billion. On top of that, we still have capital controls that were imposed in 2015. These are still in place. Next slide, please. So where did this cost come from? First, the economy returned to recession in 2015 and 16. Next. It decoupled from the rest of the euro area. You can see here the economic indicators for Greece and the euro area. You can see the decoupling that happened in 2015. Next. The state's equity stake in 4 systemic banks was fully diluted, so 25 billion went down the drain. Next. Greek bank deposits dropped by 40 billion since the peak that was reached in September 2014. So, of course, the credit crunch deepened. Next. And here you can see the credit spreads. You can see that Greek credit spreads remain well above what they are in other euro area sovereigns. Next. So the point I want to make is that austerity is not a choice. It's not something that countries choose to do. Countries that have lost market access or face very high premia in the market have no choice. They have to bring down their budget deficits and they have to reach a sustainable fiscal position. Next. Greece's structural impediments to growth will not be corrected by exiting the euro area, as I mentioned earlier. There are huge structural impediments. There are very large non-performing loans in the banks. There is a weak insolvency regime and a very inefficient judicial system that have slowed down the restructuring of companies that is necessary if Greece is to attract the capital it needs to grow. Next. Removing these structural impediments obviously is essential for growth. Next. Here is the World Bank Doing Business report for 2018. You can see that Greece ranks 67th. It has been falling in ranking in the last couple of years. And within this total ranking, Greece ranks exceptionally low in the areas of registering property, where it ranks 141st, and enforcing contracts because of the slow judicial system, where Greece ranks 133rd. Thank you. So I look forward to your questions.